Hey guys, it's Danconia and welcome back to the Overwatch League Roundup 2020 Week 14 results. So Week 14 has been a real interesting one because we've had some very interesting results coming around the league, and it's actually been an enlightening week because we've seen obviously two teams that, well, Vancouver Titans that have got a completely new look and London Spitfire who we haven't seen in quite a long time. So we didn't really know how these two teams were going to hit the ground in terms of coming back to the league. And then we've got big, matchups between Shanghai and Seoul, see if Seoul could bounce back and things like that. But let's not delay. Let's get straight into these results. And we are going to start off on May the 9th with Shanghai versus Seoul Dynasty. And this was very interesting. So the theme of this week is the fact that we actually went back to more of the May for some teams, and some teams tried to force more of the dive. We've actually seen quite a bit of Sombra Tracer dive from a lot of teams, and so it's been a clash of styles at points, but Seoul Dynasty and Shanghai Dragons were quite happy to run either the May comps or the Shanghai or the dive with the Sombra and the Tracer, and you could see compared to last week it was much more comfortable for the Seoul Dynasty to be playing this. They didn't have to run the Echo. Echo really let them down. Prophet really didn't look brilliant on the Echo last week. Seoul Dynasty get a 3-2 victory over the Shanghai Dragons in really interesting fashion because I don't think a lot of people would have actually predicted this. Considering the run of form that Seoul were on, they came into this having not actually picked up any maps in the past three matches, including a 3-0 for the Shanghai Dragons. So to bounce back like this is really impressive from the Seoul Dynasty, and it does brighten the future for this Seoul Dynasty side. It shows that they can compete with the very best in the league. And also, I think Shanghai Dragons are now starting to be, not caught out, that's the wrong word, but I think they're starting to be read by some teams, and I think this could be evident again if they take on New York Excelsior at some point again. So perhaps work to do for the Shanghai Dragons, but it was a very close game and it was very good Overwatch, so it's well worth checking out. But on the same day, we saw the Chengdu Hunters taking on London Spitfire. Now, we didn't know what to expect from London Spitfire. Would we see their new main tank Jihan? We wouldn't. We would see JMac, because they would very heavily want to run either Orisa Sigma or Orisa Diva. So they ran JMac and Bernard. And Bernard, again, was very decent. We saw the normal Sanguinar highly backline with the subbing in of Krillin at times, depending on the map if they wanted a Zenyatta. And we saw Glister alongside the new DPS player, Although had a good display against the Chengdu Hunters on the May. Glister switched between McCree and Tracer and Widowmaker. He hit a heck of a shot on Junkertown with Widowmaker. He actually, basically told Bacon Jack to sit, in not so many words, but with the shot he certainly did. But London Spitfire get a 3-0 victory over the Chengdu Hunters. Now, this is a very good look from the Spitfire. They came into this very well prepared, and they look like a team. What impresses me about the Spitfire very often is you can see the coaching having an effect. It's a very young squad with some very, very experienced coaches. Remember Pavane and Agape. So they are looking like they are steadily improving. And this looks like a better London than what we saw earlier on in the season. Remember, this is a London Spitfire that was going 3-2 against the likes of Washington and Florida. But that was Florida when they weren't as good as they are now, remember. But this is a London that gets their first 3-0 of the season, first non-3-2 victory, and goes actually fairly well in the match. They dominate the Chengdu Hunters fairly efficiently, which is really good to see. They were very well practiced, but they've got a much tougher test coming on later on. Then we saw the Guangzhou Charge taking on the New York Excelsior. This is a surprising one. A 3-1 for the Guangzhou Charge. And they are by no means lucky with this. Guangzhou Charge were very, very good against the New York Excelsior. The New York Excelsior were poor. I'm not going to lie. They tried to force really silly comps. Like, who are you on the Genji on King's Row? I don't know why they're trying to force that. I really don't know. It's very bizarre. And I think it's an opportunity missed for New York. They could have made it a lot closer than it was, but Guangzhou came into this. They have had a very good week. And Guangzhou are in pole position right now to take that #1 seed in Asia, and we never, ever would have thought it would have been that. We would have thought New York or Shanghai all the way, or maybe Seoul if they bucked up their ideas. But, oh boy, that Asia tournament is going to look real interesting if it carries on like it is. But, moving over to North America, and we see Paris Eternal taking on the Los Angeles Gladiators. No surprises here for me that Paris Eternal get a 3-1 win. It is a tit-for-tat sort of game. Gladiators certainly didn't go down without a fight, but Paris Eternal have got that little bit more quality than the Gladiators, in my opinion. I thought the Gladiators would be a bit better than they are. I'm not gonna lie. They've got good DPS, and this is a Paris Eternal side that we have to remember is nowhere near at full strength. They've only got 2 supports. They're missing XZ through injury. They're missing Smex through health condition issues. And they're also waiting for Sparkle at the end of the month. So when Paris Eternal get these players, like, not necessarily Smex, because Hanbin is really, really good. Hanbin had a fantastic display this week. But when they get those 2 DPS players back, XZ and Sparkle, this team is going to be good. Like, really good. And Soon and Nico are good already. So, man, it's a lot to look forward to as if you're a Paris fan. But this is the one that people were waiting for. Washington Justice taking on the Vancouver Titans. It was a Papega match, I'm not going to lie. Both teams with a lot of mistakes. Washington Justice got a 3-1 victory over the Vancouver Titans. Vancouver, there is an inherent problem with the DPS line of the Vancouver Titans. It's Sooner and Dalton, and they are both primarily hit scan players. Yes, Sooner can play the Hangzhou, but there's no real Mei player. There's no real Echo player. So this Vancouver Titans squad is going to have to sign a projectile DPS. If not, they are going to suffer big time. Big time. But the early indications for Vancouver, remember, it is literally only their first week. They've been together for a matter of days. It's not good. But it could improve slightly with time, but losing 3-1 to the Justice is not brilliant when Justice didn't look brilliant themselves. I'm not even gonna lie, like, this was not a brilliant match of Overwatch. Washington are good for their win, but it was, bottom tier of the Overwatch League sort of Overwatch. That's what I will say. But moving on to the Houston Outlaws taking on the Atlanta Reign. Houston Outlaws, they put up a decent fight. We see the return of the Hydration Orisa, which I suppose is great. I don't know quite what was up with Muma, unless they don't believe that Muma is very good on the Orisa, but then again, Muma hasn't had exactly a stellar season. Atlanta Reign get a 3-0 victory here. This is exactly what the Atlanta Reign needed after that narrow and agonizing 3-2 loss to the Los Angeles Valiant last week that they didn't expect. They really needed to get back on track, and they do exactly this with a fairly good and fairly dominant 3-0 win over the Houston Outlaws. Houston Outlaws, they're cropping up in the standings where you'd expect them now. Unfortunately for them, I thought there were some improvements coming through, but I mean, I think actually overall the league is a bit tighter than it has been previously. So I think this year is a bit tougher for some teams, but yeah, it's not great for the Houston Outlaws, but again, Atlanta Reign are a very good team and there's no shame in losing to them. Then we move on to the Los Angeles Valiant taking on the Boston Uprising. Now, this will surprise no one that Los Angeles Valiant get a 3-0 victory over the Boston Uprising. Boston is Boston. The only team that I could possibly see Boston beating right now would be the Vancouver Titans. And that's it. There's not really much else to say. I believe Boston take on the Gladiators next week. So, again, it's not looking bright. It's not looking bright for the Boston Uprising. I mean, we've gone over this multiple times. And, yeah, there's not much to say at the moment. Valiant get the job done in good fashion. So, well done to the Valiant. And they are looking very, very good in the NA seeding for that May tournament. Again, a lot of people wouldn't have expected it. But sometimes it depends how the fixtures fall as well. Again, with Florida Mayhem, that's very much the case, which we'll talk about in a minute. Hangzhou Spark taking on the Shanghai Dragons is up next, and Shanghai Dragons make short work of the team in pink with a 3-0 victory here for the Dragons, getting themselves right back on track after that narrow loss to the Seoul Dynasty. I don't think it's the poorest of weeks for the Dragons. I'm not going to lie. Seoul have definitely stepped up now. And I don't think it's an atrocious week for the Dragons, even though they did lose to Seoul. It's not the most ideal. They'd want to go, they want to get both wins, but it's not the most atrocious of weeks. That's the way I'll put it. But then we had the London Spitfire taking on the Guangzhou Charge. So Guangzhou Charge got a really impressive victory over the New York Excelsior. London Spitfire got an impressive victory over a poor Chengdu Hunters, let's be honest. So there was kind of a mismatch here, but this actually is fairly close despite the scoreline. So it's a 3-1 win for the Guangzhou Charge. But actually, it is fairly close. It is fairly close. London, it's all close apart from Volskaya. Volskaya was the last map, and that wasn't really that close. But London, they played very, very slow. Very, 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 very slow. And they limited really the amount of fights they could have in every map. And it was not great. I'm not going to lie. They didn't always capitalize on the advantages they had. And although didn't really impress me in this match. Because they were Guangzhou were running the Sombra Tracer dive a lot. And it was a clash of styles, and although kept using his Blizzard to try and catch the dive from Rio, and he was kind of solo Blizzarding Rio, and half the time it wouldn't work. And at the point on Volskaya, when they had to win the fight, he goes to try and solo Blizzard Rio as he's coming in, and Rio just gets out. And yeah, it's just a complete waste of a Blizzard. It wasn't the best look from London, I'm not going to lie, but it's long-term coaching that will iron out the London Spitfire, in my opinion. And so I think actually taking a map off the Guangzhou Charge, considering what they did to New York Excelsior earlier in the week, is actually a good result for the London Spitfire. And I don't think we really expected the London Spitfire to get a win over the Guangzhou Charge at this point. Next week, London will take on Shanghai and Hangzhou though. So yeah, I mean, Hangzhou is winnable for London, but Shanghai is a whole different ballgame. But moving on to the Dallas Fuel taking on the Philadelphia Fusion, this was actually a tasty match. Dallas Fuel gave this a real good go. I'm really impressed with the Dallas Fuel this week. They gave it a good go, but it was a 3-1 win for the Philadelphia Fusion, because the Philadelphia Fusion are the Philadelphia Fusion, and they are a darn good team. So actually, I thought Alarm was getting called out slightly this week. I don't think it's Alarm's best showing this week, I'm not going to lie. But Dallas Fuel, there is light there. Yes, they're not one of the best teams in the league, but they're certainly a team that I think could be a play-ins team this year. I certainly think they could be up there, and I think they could cause some issues for teams like Paris. I'd like to see Dallas take on a team like Paris right now. I think that would be very, very insightful. So I don't think there's much to be sad about from the Dallas Fuel this week. Even though it was a loss, I think it was a good loss. It sounds stupid to say it like that, but I think it was a good loss. But talking of a good loss, next up was the Toronto Defiant taking on the San Francisco Shock. And this was actually possibly the game of the week to rival Shanghai versus Seoul, because this was actually really close despite the scoreline. It was a 3-1 win for the San Francisco Shock. And if it wasn't for Moth and Smurf setting up for a magnificent boop, I think that's probably one of the best plays we've seen in quite a long time, they wouldn't have won Kings Row either. This was really, really good from the Toronto Defiant against a really, really good Shock team. So this could be due to Cruz. They did say they had brought him in for shot calling and all that, and of course he was in the match. But yeah, this is an improvement from the Toronto Defiant, and if they can maintain this sort of performance, they are actually looking pretty good going forward. But moving on to our last fixture, and it was the Florida Mayhem taking on the Vancouver Titans, and we'd already seen the Vancouver Titans, or the new Vancouver Titans, against the Washington Justice, and things weren't particularly bright. But against the Mayhem, there were good points for the Vancouver Titans. They made it very close on Junkertown, and I believe Busan Mecha Base, I think, was pretty close. But it ends up as a 3-0 for Florida Mayhem. Florida Mayhem just have too much experience, too much quality for this Vancouver Titans roster. We will have to see in the coming weeks whether this Vancouver Titans roster can slowly improve with coaching and experience, but at the moment it's looking pretty rough, I'm not going to lie, with no real obvious projectile player for the DPS and a questionable main tank maybe. Shredlock he kind of got pummeled against Florida Mayhem because BQB was just, well, he was just hacking him all the time. He basically had no abilities for the entire match. I kind of felt sorry for the guy. But yeah, there's a lot of work to do for the Vancouver Titans, and it could be a case of writing the season off at this point in time. But those are the results for this week. We will take a last look at the standings in this video, and on top we have the Philadelphia Fusion. In second we still have Shanghai Dragons despite their loss, but San Francisco Shock are closing the gap on them. New York Excelsior are in fourth after that loss, and now they are that one loss behind the rest of them. So this is not an ideal week for New York. Florida are all the way up to fifth now. Florida looking really good, but they have had a fairly easy fixture schedule, and next week they take on Washington, so Florida is going to be a really good May for them. Seoul Dynasty are up to 6th. London still maintain a 7th place, even though they went 1-1 this week. Next week is perhaps a bit tough for London, though, with Shanghai and Hangzhou. 8th, we have Atlanta Reign. 9th, we have Paris. Guangzhou are up to 10th, and I think they will continue climbing these standings, actually, because they're looking really good. Los Angeles Gladiators are in 11th. Hangzhou Spark are in 12th. Dallas Fuel down to 13th after that loss, but I don't think that's too much to get panicky over if you're a Dallas Fuel fan. I think they will climb the league. I think they've got a pretty decent team now, and I think they could beat out teams like the Gladiators if they get a chance to. Los Angeles Valiant are in 14th, Toronto Defiant in 15th, and if they can maintain that performance they had over the San Francisco Shock, then I think they will climb. Vancouver all the way down in 16th now, and I'm only expecting them to drop over the next coming weeks. Houston Outlaws in 17th, Chengdu Hunters in 18th, Washington Justice in 19th, and Boston Uprising in 20th. Actually, I've got a feeling that next week, Vancouver Titans take on the Houston Outlaws. So yeah, that's going to be an interesting one. But I am going to leave it here for this one. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you liked it, give it a like, subscribe if you're new, and I will see you in the next video. See you then.